In June of 1979, American factories employed 19.6 million people. It was the highest number in the country's history. It has never been reached again. By 2019, that figure had fallen to 12.8 million. 6.7 million jobs gone. A 35% collapse across 4 decades. Enough people to fill a great American city, walking out of the factory gate and not coming back. Almost everyone has a villain for this. Some blame China. Some blame trade deals. Some blame the robots. But the most famous explanation cannot account for the strangest fact in the case. American factories kept producing more with fewer people. By the end of this episode, we will put 3 figures on the death of the factory town, how many jobs left, who actually took them, and why the factories are now returning, without the workers. Hey, welcome back to the Rise Index. If you're new here, this is where we follow the numbers behind who makes what, who profits, and how economic power really moves. Great to have you. Today's story is those lost factory jobs, and the surprising reason they're coming back without the workers. Let's put the first figure on the table. Start with the sentence this episode is named after. Rich countries stopped making things. It is one of the most repeated claims in modern economics. It is also wrong. Rich countries did not stop making things. They make more things than ever. American factories produce more output today than they did at that 1979 employment peak, with millions fewer workers doing it. That single fact, output up, jobs down, is the key that unlocks the entire story. Offshoring closed real plants and devastated real towns. But it cannot, by itself, explain how the remaining factories raised output while employment fell. Inside those plants, productivity and automation changed how many workers each dollar of production required. So the real question is not, why did rich countries stop making things? They didn't. The question is, why did making things stop needing so many people? And why did the people, the places, and the paychecks feel the loss as if the factory had vanished? Because, to a laid-off worker, the distinction is invisible. A plant that keeps its output but cuts most of its jobs looks, from the parking lot, exactly like a plant that shut down. The town empties either way. This is the trap at the center of deindustrialization. The economy-wide statistic, output, kept rising. The human statistic, employment, collapsed. Both are true at once, and almost every argument about factories confuses the two. There is a longer arc behind those arrows. Manufacturing share of the American workforce fell from more than 1 in 5 workers to fewer than 1 in 10. Versions of that shift appear across many rich economies as productivity rises and services take a larger share of employment. This is bigger than one trade agreement or one election cycle. When people reach for a villain, they usually reach for the same one, China. And the evidence is real. Economists call it the China shock. When China entered the world trading system around the turn of the century and joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, a wave of low-cost imports hit American manufacturing faster and harder than trade theory had predicted. The landmark research by the economists Orta, Dawn, and Hansen put numbers on it. Between 1997 and 2011, Chinese import competition is associated with roughly 2 to 2.4 million lost jobs across the whole economy, direct and indirect. Narrowed to manufacturing specifically, the figure is around 985,000 jobs. And it was concentrated. In the years from 2000 to 2007, the most destructive stretch, Chinese imports are estimated to account for about 55% of the manufacturing decline in that window, close to 980,000 jobs. This was not spread gently across the country. It fell on specific towns, furniture towns, textile towns, electronics towns, where a single industry was the economy. When the imports arrived, those places did not simply retrain and recover. Wages stagnated for 15 years or more in the hardest hit labor markets. So the China shock is not a myth. Over the longer window from 2001 to 2019, one influential estimate attributes close to 60% of all American manufacturing job losses to the trade shock with China. That is a serious number, and dismissing it would be dishonest. But notice the word doing the work in that sentence, attributes. Different studies, different windows, and different methods produce very different shares. And when you step back from the worst hit years and the worst hit towns to the whole country across the whole period, a different, larger force comes into view. That force is productivity, including automation, better machinery, software, and redesigned production. And the reason it hides is simple: no one campaigns against a productivity curve. The clearest analysis comes from Ball State University, looking at the decade from 2000 to 2010. Of the roughly 6.4 million manufacturing jobs the United States lost in those years, the study attributes about 88%, around 5.6 million, to automation and rising productivity. Trade and offshoring account for about 12%. Read those numbers with the date attached. In this study of this decade, productivity explains the larger share. That does not erase the China shock estimates. It does overturn the idea that every missing factory job can be counted as a job shipped overseas. The visible signature is the same split from the opening, output, and employment moving in opposite directions. Trade changed where goods were made. Productivity changed how many people were needed wherever the goods were made. The national decline contains both stories. One worker running a bank of computer-controlled machines now does what a shift of many workers once did. The steel still gets cut. The car still gets welded. The chip still gets made. The line simply doesn't need the crowd it used to. Now, be careful. These two forces are not rivals for a single crown, and the numbers do not simply cancel. The China shock studies and the automation studies use different windows, regions, and methods. A large China effect in specific towns during specific years and a large automation effect nationwide across a decade can both be true. Trade and technology also feed each other. Import pressure is a reason to automate, and automation is a reason to keep the plant at home. The correction is therefore narrower and stronger. China explains a severe trade shock, especially in exposed towns. It does not explain all deindustrialization. Productivity removed workers inside surviving factories, and that loss is harder to see because a machine has no flag. Here is the force this episode allows itself to name. Not a country, but a doctrine. Call it shareholder, value maximization, and the offshoring logic that flows from it. To see how it works, draw a curve. Picture the life of a product, say a phone or a pair of trainers, laid out left to right from the first idea to the final sale. On the vertical axis, plot how much profit each stage captures. The shape that emerges is a smile. High on the left, low in the middle, high again on the right. Start at that first peak. Design, engineering, research. The margin there is rich. In electronics and apparel, illustratively, this end can capture something like 30 to 40% of the gross margin. This is where the product is imagined. It tends to stay in the rich country. At the bottom of the curve sits assembly, the actual making, the hands on the line. This is the labor-heavy stage, and it is the thinnest margin of all. Illustratively, assembly might capture only 2 to 8%. This is the stage that got offshored to Vietnam, to China, to Bangladesh. On the right, branding, marketing, the logo people pay a premium for. The margin is rich again, perhaps 20 to 30%. This is where the product is sold, and it too tends to stay in the rich country. Now, the corporate logic becomes obvious and coldly rational. If you are a company answerable to shareholders, you keep the high-margin ends, design and brand, at home, and you move the low-margin middle, assembly, to wherever labor is cheapest. You are not destroying value, you are concentrating it. This is the crucial correction to the "they stopped making things" story. Rich countries did not stop making things at random. They deliberately stopped making the 2 to 8% things, the assembly, and kept the 20 to 40% things, the design, the software, the brand, the intellectual property. And they kept the high-value physical goods too. Rich economies still build aircraft, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, precision machinery, the capital-intensive, high-margin manufacturing that never fit the cheap labor logic. What they shed was the bottom of the smile. But a balance sheet has an address. The margin that stayed home landed in design studios and head offices. The margin that left took the assembly line, and the town built around it, with it. The smile curve is efficient for the shareholder and, at the bottom, brutal for the worker. That tension is the honest core of this story, which tells us something important about why the factories left. It was not an act of nature, nor an iron law of markets that no one chose. Offshoring was a strategy, a decision, repeated across thousands of boardrooms, that the cheapest place to do the low-margin work was somewhere else. Strategies can be reversed. And in the 2020s, something began to reverse this one. In the 2020s, the map started moving in reverse. After 40 years of factories leaving, they began, on paper, to return. The industry has a name for it: reshoring. The numbers are real and large. In 2022, American companies announced around 364,000 reshoring and foreign investment manufacturing jobs, a record more than 50% above the year before. In 2024, announcements ran to around 244,000 jobs. And the money behind it dwarfs anything the offshoring era saw returning. Spending on new manufacturing construction in the United States reached roughly $223 billion annualized in 2024, about double the level of 2020. Concrete is being poured. Steel is going up. This part is not a slogan. So, is this the workers' victory at last? The factory town rebuilt? The paycheck restored? The smile curve flipped? No. And the reasons why are the most important part of this episode. Reason 1. This reshoring was not won at the bargaining table. It was bought by the state. 2 landmark American laws, the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, committed something on the order of $272 billion in subsidies and tax credits to pull manufacturing home. The factories did not come back because the economics of cheap labor changed their mind. They came back because governments paid them to. Reason 2. Tariffs. By raising the cost of importing, tariffs narrow the wage gap that made offshoring rational. The threat alone reshapes decisions. Projections for 2025 point to a sharp jump in announced automotive jobs as companies move to repatriate assembly ahead of tariff walls. The smile curve didn't change. The government changed the price of the middle. Reason 3. And this is the one that breaks the happy ending. The factories coming back are not the labor-hungry factories that left. In 2024, around 88% of announced manufacturing jobs were in high-tech or medium-tech manufacturing. Semiconductors alone drew over $100 billion of investment and about 35% of announced jobs. Electric vehicle batteries and electrical equipment took another large share. That is the twist inside the reshoring wave. The same automation that emptied the old factories is now the reason the new ones can exist at home at all. A modern semiconductor fab or battery plant needs relatively few workers per dollar of output, which is precisely why building it in a high-wage country now pencils out. Location matters less when the line runs itself. So the factory returns, but the bargain does not. The old deal traded a town's labor for a town's prosperity. The new plant offers fewer, higher-skill jobs, technicians, engineers, process specialists, and does not need the crowd that once filled the parking lot in 1979. Winning the factory back does not undo what deindustrialization did. It changes which problems are left. The first thing that did not come home is job density. The 1979 factory turned ordinary labor into a middle-class wage at enormous scale. The 2020s factory turns capital and a small number of skilled workers into high-value output. You can rebuild the building, you cannot easily rebuild the headcount. The second thing is the geography. The China shock fell on specific towns, and reshoring does not automatically return to those same towns. A new fab follows talent, power, water, and university clusters, not the map of where the furniture plants used to be. The places that lost the most are not guaranteed to gain the most. The third is the wage bargain. In the old model, a large, less skilled workforce held real bargaining power because the line could not run without it. In an automated plant, that leverage is thinner. Reshoring, so far, is not a story of restored worker power. It is a story of subsidies, tariffs, and machines making an old set of economics obsolete. And there is a dependency the concrete does not fix. You can build a battery plant in a rich country, but if the processed minerals, the components, and the equipment still come from abroad, the factory has moved without the supply chain moving with it. Bringing home the final assembly is not the same as bringing home the whole chain, a lesson the last episode's map should make familiar. So, reshoring is real and significant, but it is not the mirror image of offshoring. Offshoring shipped out jobs, factories, and supply chains together. Reshoring brings back some factories and some high-skill jobs, while the mass employment, the bargaining power, and much of the chain stay where the last 40 years left them. The honest way to hold all of this, the factories are returning. The 1979 job market is not. Yeah. So return to the sentence we started with. Rich countries stopped making things and lay it against the evidence. It is false as stated. Output rose. Rich economies still make aircraft, medicine, chips, and precision machinery. What collapsed was not making things. It was factory employment. 6.7 million American jobs and a 35% fall from the 1979 peak. Who took those jobs? At least two forces, measured through different lenses. China delivered a devastating, concentrated trade shock to specific towns. Productivity and automation reduced labor inside factories that remained. In Ball State's 2000 to 2010 window, the estimate was 88% productivity and 12% trade. That ratio is not a universal score. It is evidence that neither force alone is the whole truth. And why did the making leave in the first place? Because a doctrine made it rational. The smile curve told companies to keep the high-margin ends, design and brand, and ship the low-margin middle. That was optimal for the shareholder. It was destructive for the assembly line town. That is the force in this story. Not a villainous country, but a logic. So we can now answer with three figures, the way we promised. How many left? 6.7 million American factory jobs from the 1979 peak. What changed the job count? Trade removed production from exposed places, while productivity reduced labor inside the production that remained. And what is coming back? Factories worth hundreds of billions, supported by policy and run with far fewer workers than their predecessors. Which resolves into three conversions worth watching. First, can reshoring convert construction into headcount? Announced jobs are a plan. The test is how many become paychecks and where. Second, can it convert factories into supply chains, bringing home not just assembly but the minerals, components, and equipment behind it? Third, can it convert output back into shared prosperity, or concentrate the gains as narrowly as the smile curve once did? On the current scoreboard, the results are mixed. On concrete, reshoring is winning. The construction spending is real. On jobs, it is uncertain. Automation caps the headcount the old towns are hoping for. On prosperity, it is unproven. The new factory does not, by itself, rebuild the bargain the old one delivered by accident of its labor needs. So the deepest correction is this: rich countries never stopped making things. They stopped making things with people. The factory was never the point. The jobs were. And the jobs left long before the last factory did, chased out by a productivity curve and a corporate strategy, not by a single foreign flag. The factories are coming home. Whether the prosperity that once came with them can be rebuilt, by policy, by skill, by design, is the open question the concrete cannot answer. A country can subsidize a building. It is far harder to subsidize back a way of life. But if the rich world is bringing assembly home to machines, one question hangs over the entire map. Where does the labor-hungry, low-margin middle of the smile curve go next? For decades, the answer was China. Then, increasingly, Vietnam. Now, a far larger candidate is stepping forward, determined to become the world's next factory floor, 1.4 billion people and a young workforce. Next time on The Rise Index, can India become the next factory of the world? Or has the world changed the rules of that game before India could win it? This is The Rise Index. Subscribe and follow where power moves next.